Something that happened to me that changed my life. And it concerns the life of my premature child 35 years ago. When I was 27 weeks along with my first child, I went into premature labor, and the doctor said that the child had only had a 4% chance of living, and if he did live, he would be severely disabled. Now, in these days, that may not be the case, but in those days, they didn't have the kind of neonatal care that they do today. So I was really sad, and my first reaction was to really cry a lot. And then I remembered that I had just finished reading a book called Power in Praise by Merlin Carothers, and his teaching was revolutionary to me, and it was, no matter what you're going through, surrender it, give thanks to God for the good that's going to come out of it, and just focus on praising and trusting God throughout the situation and being thankful. So I decided to really do that and prove that. So I immediately started saying, thank you, God, this is your child before he's mine, and I surrender him to you. You must have a purpose in allowing this to happen. And I know if I surrender this and focus on praise and thanksgiving for the situation, you will bring out some good of it. Just like Romans 8:28, when it says all things work together for good. I believe this will work together for good. And I know by being thankful, he will either die and go directly in your arms, or he will live and it'll be a miracle, and he'll be completely healthy if it be your will, and for my greatest spiritual growth. So I did finally have that. 48 hours later I had that baby, and I was just thanking and praising God. Now I have to tell you, at first it was difficult, but then when I really got into it, I could really focus on that praise and thanksgiving. He was in intensive care, and the first thing they did was take him to a special place where they fed him IVs through his head, and he was under 2 pounds, and he was hanging on to life and death. He was just teetering between life and death. I would go and visit him with my husband every day, and we sterilize our hands and put on those green hospital gowns and stick our hands through the little places, the little holes in the incubator, and touch him and hold him. And when it was time to leave, my heart would break, and I'd think of how sad he must be, because all he knew was pain. They would be taking blood samples from his heels to test his oxygen several times a day. He had the IVs in his head. He had no cuddling, no holding. And it broke my heart. So I decided to make a prayer. And I said something like this: Father, he needs a mother's touch, a mother's holding, a mother's cuddling, and he can't have that. No one can touch him as he's isolated in this environment. But Jesus is a man, and he can hold him and hug him. And I'm asking for that somehow, that Jesus hold him and hug him and help him feel loved. I didn't know how that prayer would be answered, or if it would, but at least it made me feel better. He seemed to be doing better, and then he had to have a heart operation. And he came through that. And I kept just focusing on praise and thanksgiving, leaving the outcome to God, and it looked like he was going to live. But one day they called me up and said, please come in right away. Your son is not doing well, and he may not make it tonight. And I said, he was doing so well, what happened? And they said, well, he's got double pneumonia. Both lungs have collapsed. He's on a respirator. And apparently what I found out later, that was that in one of the feedings, they had given him formula, and the tube went down to his lungs rather than his stomach and filled his lungs with formula. So I said, what's the best that can happen if he does live? They said, well, we can't feed him, but in 4 days, if he's still alive, in 4 days, we will take the respirator, which is taped, off his mouth and see if his lungs can hold air on their own. So I went in my closet and prayed, and I thought, he can't go 4 days losing 2 to 3 ounces a day. He's under 2 pounds now. That's not going to work. So I said a prayer, and I said, Father, I haven't asked for anything except my Jesus prayer. Up until now, I've surrendered all to you, but I'm going to ask a miracle today. And what I'm asking is, if he's meant to die, then I surrender and give him to you. But if he's meant to live, I would ask that you heal him today, and when I go to the hospital, he will be completely healed. So we went to the hospital, and I was afraid to go into the room and see him because I didn't want to see all the machines and attached to him. And my husband said, come on in. You won't believe what has happened. And I came in, and there was our little Jeremy asleep in his little incubator, apparently healed. No machines, no respirator at all. And my heart sang because at that moment I knew he was meant to live, and I was going to be taking him home someday. The nurse rushed over and said, we cannot believe what happened. Right after we called you, our attention was diverted to another child that was in distress, and when we turned our attention back 5 minutes later, something had removed the tape from your child's mouth and placed the respirator aside, and we could see that he was breathing on his own. We took his temperature, did x-rays, and we could see, and tests proved that he was completely healed. The infection was gone, and he could breathe normally. And we still do not understand not only how that happened, but how that tape came off his mouth. Needless to say, I was rejoicing. And then I realized that God did heal him the moment I prayed. But had they not taken the tape off his mouth, they wouldn't have known he was healed, and they wouldn't have fed him, and he would have continued to lose weight probably. And so God actually physically went in that incubator and took that tape off so they would know that and start feeding him. He continued to get stronger and stronger day after day, and 2.5 months later I took him home, and he was a perfect child and is a perfect 35-year-old man with his own children, his own child. But that wasn't the biggest miracle. Now, remember, I kept praising and thanking God, and I know that produced this miracle, or allowed the power of God to produce this miracle. One day when Jeremy was 3.5, he bounded up in my lap, and he said, Mommy, remember when I was born? And God had somehow given him that memory, retained that memory until he had enough language at 3.5 to converse with me about it. And I said, tell me about it. And he said, Mommy, when I came out of your tummy, why couldn't you hold me? And I could see how sincere he was because he had tears in his eyes. And I said, oh, honey, you were so sick. I'm so sorry, but you had to go to a special place to get better. He said, Mommy, why did they put those things in my head? That hurt me so bad. And that was the IVs in his head. Well, he began to tell me about different procedures they did. He told me about his heart operation. He told me about the nurse, one of his favorite nurses that cared for him. And I was just amazed. And then he said, Mommy, I loved it when you and Daddy would come in your green hospital gowns and be with me. But Mommy, I was so sad when you'd leave. And then his face brightened up and he said, but when you prayed, Jesus came, Mommy, and he held me. And all of a sudden I remembered that prayer. I was dumbfounded. I said, he did? She said, yeah, Mommy, and then I wasn't afraid anymore. I said, did he hold you the whole time? He said, all the time that I was in the hospital, he held me. And I said, what was it like? What did he look like? What did he feel like? He said, Mommy, his chest was so warm. And he kept petting my head and saying, everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. And it felt so warm and good to be there in his arms. And that was the biggest miracle of all. I just want to encourage you that no matter what you're going through, God can work miracles. And he answers prayers, even even though we can't see the answer sometimes or know how He's going to do it, which is proved by my Jesus prayer. And I believe and I know that those things could come into our lives, mine and my son's, because I lifted that situation to God, I surrendered, and I kept focusing on praise and thanksgiving to God for allowing me to go through that situation, for the spiritual benefit it would have, and for my growth and the growth of all concerned. Thank you for listening. I will encourage you, never give up hope. And whatever you're going through, turn it over to God and start praising and thanking Him for the good that's going to come out of it. And it is a promise. All things work together for good for those who love God. And praise and thanksgiving is one of the highest forms of loving God. Thank you for listening.